This is one of my latest maps in Trackmania, an arcade racing game that allows players to create their own levels through an easy to use editor for others to race on. To the unknown eye, this might seem like any other map in the game, but to me, this map is something special, as it represents my mapping style that I've developed throughout my first year of mapping. And to get to know how I got here, we have to go back in time. See, ever since back in 2008, when I first started playing Trackmania Nations Forever during middle school, I have always been fascinated by the different maps that people have created. Although my Trackmania career back then didn't last very long, maybe a couple of months, I've always had the thought in the back of my head that it would be pretty cool to create something that others can enjoy playing with and compete on. Even during my Counter-Strike era, I tried making maps for others to run around and shoot on. But it was until approximately 1.5 years ago when I got into Trackmania again, since my long break from 2008. And this was a complete coincidence. One day a classmate of mine, you might know him as the Swedish player Keby, sat next to me in class browsing a Trackmania Discord. Having previously played the game during my childhood, I couldn't resist asking if people still played the game. And sure enough, there was still a small but very dedicated community out there. Long story short, when I came home from that day, I decided to re-download the game again. And after a month of playing on various different servers, I decided to try my luck in the editor. After playing around with it for a while, I was completely hooked. And I present to you my first ever map that I could go back and find. The map, Unnamed LOL. A minute and 20-second long tech map featuring a loop, some uncalculated jumps, turns, and no scenery to be found except for maybe a sign or two. A couple of months ago, me and some friends were looking at our oldest creations and decided to hunt them for a bit. Being friends with people like Bürd, Tekky and Andi, people who are known in the Trackmania community for playing maps in an unintended way, finding and performing cuts, it didn't take long until they managed to find a way to skip some big portions of the map. The first one being the loop. This cut worked out well because the fortunate checkpoint placements and the road pieces that were close enough to each other to be able to bounce off the side of one to the other. The second cut was at the end of the track, where you could turn around at the second to last CP, performing a so-called reroute. And after the turnaround, take the last CP and then finally overwall into the finish. Now, as you can probably tell, this map was not perfect by any means, but at least it was something that got me started. And it was definitely fun going back to take a look at one of the first maps that I have ever made. Time goes by in TMNF and I started playing Team 2. Being somewhat better at the game now than when I was back in TMNF when I created my first map, I tried to go for all author medals on the campaign maps. And then move on to a server called LOL Maps. This was the first time I actually had a chance getting people to play my creations, as the admins of the server back then had an open map submission in their Discord. Knowing that my maps could potentially get featured on one of the most popular servers back then made me open the editor again. Being a fan of both LOL and tech, I decided to make a very short tech map with a twist. I present to you Short Karlberg, a map that starts off with a double neo slide, because I was destined to learn how to neo slide back then. And as you can see by my personal best replay from back then, the start of the track made perfect sense. The map then continued with a booster into some off-road, a drift initialized by the small airtime from the grass to the road transition, and a very tight banked uphill with an interesting speed check where you had to land on a booster in order to get maximum speed into the finish. A simple but yet hard map to master, especially when you can't neoslide consistently like me back then. Following this map, I made 3 other maps with similar style. They were short, with some drifts, and I even tried to make some interesting scenery. Now there was one of these maps that stood out more than the others, and that was the map Short Karlberg 4. A map that got really good feedback from the people that played it. The map starts off with a downhill into a drop that initializes a drift into some sort of underground drift, followed by an uphill into a dip where you have to keep yourself on the ground in order to not fly out, into an indoors blue ground area, and it ends up with an uphill into the finish. I was really happy with this one, as it was really fun to hunt and had some interesting characteristics and scenery. It was at this time where Nadeo, the creators of the game, decided to release a teaser for a new Trackmania game, famously known as Trackmania 2020, the most recent Trackmania game released to date. I was stoked about the news, as this was when I saw my opportunity. Since the game is new, maps are in high demand. So my thought process was that if I wanted people to play my maps, this was the perfect time. So I tried to improve my mapping skills by making a couple of maps in preparations for the release of the new game. None that are in particular special, but they did their deed as I got more comfortable with routing and scenery making. The game was soon after released, and as expected, I jumped straight into the editor to try out the new and improved features. The map that I decided to make was a remake of my favorite map that I had made so far, being Short Karlberg 4. However, something that I realized quickly was that at the start of the map, I had used a block in the original map that was non-existent in the new game. The flat to banked high road transition. Something that I am still surprised isn't added to the default editor. So while I was a bit sad that I couldn't make a one-to-one remake, this would have been a problem in the later parts of the track either way, as there were different blocks that also were not a thing in the new game. So I decided to opt for a new solution with the use of some of the new implemented blocks. The ending of the map was also not quite like the original, but I decided to not put as much effort into it, so this became a speed build remake. For scenery, I decided to use some of the new hill blocks, just like any other beginner mapper in the new game, with some blossom tree spam, of course. The map turned out okay. It wasn't my proudest work, but at least I got to know the editor and some of the new blocks that were introduced with it. I decided to put it on the new map review feature to see what people would think about the map, and to my surprise, I got a whopping 4.5 rating. Probably because the game was new and people were generous, cause let's be honest, it definitely isn't that great. Either way, another feature that was added to the new game that didn't exist in any of the previous Trackmania titles was free blocking. A feature that allows you to rotate the blocks and place them freely outside the normal grid with the use of arrow keys and numpad plus and minus. This was exciting news, and I began making a rather difficult map with the use of this feature, Karlberg 2. It was in fact so difficult that only 51 players have finished the map to date. Another reason for this low number is probably because it wasn't very advertised, and it was just a way for me to learn about the new feature. There was something about this feature that felt odd to me, as I had spent a lot of time in the previous editors without it, and the fact that you can make any two blocks match together was something that ruined the excitement of finding a transition between two blocks that felt really smooth. Thankfully for me, this is an option, and I have ever since decided to stick to grid mode mapping for most of my routes as a personal preference. Although this free blocking thing was a new and exciting feature, so I decided to play around with it for some later maps as well, including Karlberg 3, which is another short tech map. This was the first normal map that I made in the new game that wasn't a remake or a free block experiment. The map starts off with a downhill. This downhill is special, because it turns out that if you drive this exact downhill by just pressing forward in the new game, you don't get airtime. This is something that you had to counter in the previous games by driving diagonally over the tipping point of the downhill curve. Why am I going so in depth of this? Well, it's just something that I noticed in the making of this map, and I found this being a very interesting but also unnecessary change, as this was one of the more satisfying and easy to build starts. It was even used in one of the TM2 campaign maps. Either way, the map is then followed by a drop into a ramp, some more jumps, a drift. You get the point. The route is not that special. The main focus point of this map is the scenery. While the scenery is simple, to this day I really like how this map looks. This map features some of my very first scenery towers. It has some road supports that are changed from the normal wood and some abstract art placed around the route. Something that I still make for almost all of my maps till this day. This map was definitely a step in the right direction for my personal style of scenery. A map that I made the following day was Karlberg Small World. The idea for this map was to restrict myself to a small area, much like a tower. While the route of this map isn't very intuitive, the focus of this map was more towards the scenery once again. The scenery is inspired by modern architecture, where I tried to make some sort of abstract looking house with the use of the wooden support blocks. If I were to change something about this map today, it is definitely the annoying start, as it is 3 block tilted, which is very tedious for Cam 1 players. Or even rotated the map to get more natural light on the inside. I think this would have made the map look much better. The next map I wanted to talk about is Industrial District, a map that is inspired by the Finnish mapper Simo900, who is well known for his incredible trial and transitional mapping skills. This was a map that I started building just after the release of his map, Ghost, the map of the year 2020. Now Ghost is a full speed transitional map based on driving in freewheel. And for those who don't know, freewheel is an effect block that turns off the engine of the car, making it unable to accelerate until you hit a reset or a checkpoint trigger. Now my map isn't exactly like the map Ghost. Although it was inspired by it, the focus was more on the transitional style of mapping. A style of mapping that is in my opinion one of the skills that make a good mapper. A quote taken from TBC, the transitional building competition by Simo900 himself, is: transitions are changes between different surfaces like platforms and sculptures, with small jumps or drops. The more creative your block use for them is, the better. Transitions don't have to be 100% safe and always work from every angle, but managing to make your transitions reliable will give you more points. Keep in mind, however, that huntability isn't the main point of transitional tracks. Taking this into consideration when watching the replay of this map, I am pretty happy with the result. And even though this map has some 3 block transitions and unreliable parts which I probably wouldn't have done today, this was by no means a bad start to my transitional mapping style that I have today. The next map I made is yet another tech map by the name of One Short Year. You enter the really tight tech track surrounded by green grass, a small bridge and some green trees representing the summer, followed by ice and snow representing the winter, into some dirt-like scenery, and then you end up back in the summer again, tying the year together, hence the name of the map One Short Year. The map itself is kind of a pain to drive because of the extremely intense and tight turns. But I know of someone who is very comfortable with these kind of maps. As someone who is one of the most respectable tech players in the game, the world record holder of this map, Karjen. The next notable map is dedicated to one of my good friends, Tekky. His birthday was around the corner at the time, and as someone who had the urge to map, what better way to combine the occasions than to make a birthday present in the form of a map. The idea was to write his name using the roadblocks as roof, and then build the map under it. It was definitely a challenge, but the end result is super screenshot friendly. I love how this map turned out. The screenshot of my club profile is actually from this map, and it is pretty fun to drive, except for some turns which are pretty tight. Although this was expected as a result of the restricted area that the map was built in. Something that I noticed when looking back at this map is that my attention to detail has drastically improved. There are so many small things, and all together they make such a huge difference. The next map was my submission to a mapping competition by the Trackmania streamer SimplyNick. The competition was to make a map fit for track of the day, and since basically all I ever mapped was tech, this is what I also decided to do for the competition. At the time of making this map, I was watching the streamer Massa, where he was hunting a remake of ESL Hokolicious. A very, if not the most famous tech track to date, and I really liked the look of the map. Now I didn't even know about Hokolicious at the time, so it wasn't a big deal to take some inspiration from it, not knowing that almost everyone who has played the game for a long time would recognize the similarities. The start, which is somewhat identical, the drop and the turnover. This was definitely a mistake on my part. Although the map is different, it was definitely comparable with the famous track, and submitting it to a somewhat big audience for everyone in chat to point out that it was a remake was a bit shocking. Lesson learned. This was the first time I had ever made a map similar to someone else's, and it backlashed. And after this I haven't made the same mistake ever again. Either way, the parts of the map that weren't inspired by other maps were pretty cool, and the scenery is definitely unique. So for me this map was an eye-opener and a learning moment. And as you can probably guess, the map didn't do too well in the competition, which is understandable. After this I decided to make a map pack known as K Very Short. A map pack where the idea was to make very short tech maps consisting of different unique tricks and drifts in order to get better at making routes and expand my knowledge about different turn combinations. This was one of my best decisions I ever made in my mapping journey, as I learned so much from it. And it is something that I tell beginner mappers to do every single time they ask me how to improve. Make short maps. Try to really think about every single block that you place. It might take hours to finish a 20-second route, but in the end of the day, it's so worth it. Quality over quantity, as they say. This map pack is a good reflection of how I improved my overall mapping skills, and I would like to showcase some of the most notable things that I learned and the feedback that I got from making this particular map pack. I'm not going to go through every single map and their layout, but I will mention a few things that I learned when making this map pack and things that I would have done differently today. One of these things is annoying airtime, unless you want to release or drift extra much if entering with too much speed. This is not really a bad thing, but it can be annoying in some cases. The map that I am showing also has a pretty blind drop in the end, and it is probably something that I would have done differently today. The second thing is very precise jumps, which are just annoying to hunt. The map that I'm showing also has a gear just after the landing, which you have to avoid in order to take the turn as fast as possible. Precise jumps close to the start make for a so-called restarting simulator, which essentially means that you restart more than driving the actual map. The gear after the landing is also pretty bad. Both of these things are something that I would avoid making today. There are also landings where you can occasionally get a bump, which gives some airtime, and jumps where it's faster to release. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is pretty annoying to have to avoid every single time you play the map. Another notable thing is precise speed checks in the end of a track. This is something that is not fun, and generally demotivating for beginner players. And here comes an obvious one, but try to avoid cuts. This can easily be done by placing checkpoints strategically or smart use of scenery. And here comes the biggest one, gears. And I cannot stress this enough. Gears are super important to be aware of when driving, but also when mapping, especially on surfaces like dirt, ice, grass, and now even plastic. Initializing a drift or a sharp turn during a gear shift can either cause the car to lose speed drastically or start an unintended noseslide. This is something that I think about in every single turn that I make, and is something that beginner mappers, like myself back then, don't even know about. Those were some of the main things that I learned about routing in the making of the K very short map pack. Scenery is also something that has improved. Every map doesn't need an excessive amount of scenery, less is more sometimes. Even the most simplistic maps can look better than spamming rocks all over the place. Note that scenery is just a personal preference, so take my words with a grain of salt. Everyone has their own style of scenery, and this is just my preference. Before leaving the very short campaign, I just want to thank a very good player, a Twitch streamer, and a new friend of mine by the name of Raceta for giving this campaign a lot of publicity in the past weeks on his journey to clean sweep the leaderboard. After the making of the very short campaign, I decided that I had enough knowledge about routing and scenery making to take on the challenge to make a proper lengthy tech map. Having previously only made a bunch of shorter tech maps, I thought it was time to make something bigger, and I present to you Despawn. A compact 47-second long tech track with many varying drifts topped off with some green tarmac off-road. This was by far one of my best work at the time and something that I am still proud of today. The map was inspired by old TMNF style tech and is in my opinion just an all-around fun tech track with some interesting scenery. Enjoy this beautiful world record run by the really talented tech player Poker, and thank you Poker for the nice comments on TMX. And it was after the release of this track that I got burnt out. You see, at this point I had almost 500 hours in the editor in only half a year. That's around 3 to 4 hours every single day on average. And not only did I play around in the editor, I also did other stuff in the game. I had improved so much, not only my mapping skills, but I had also gotten pretty good at the game. And this was a lot of information that I had to digest. This, in combination with other games that caught my attention, made me eventually quit. For 4 months. Long story short, I got burnt off the other games and came back to Trackmania and decided to start mapping again. This is where I first decided to ask for feedback on one of my maps in order to improve, cause I didn't know what to improve on. So I went to a mapping Discord which is full of mappers that are respected by the community and generally a huge inspiration for many mappers, including myself, the Waypoint Discord. I posted my map Despawn in the showcase channel with the text, a tech map that I published back in the beginning of November that I would love to get some feedback on in order to improve as a mapper. And the more you know, Sláys, a member and manager of the team, was happy to help. Some of the things that I got told was that the track was easy to drive, maybe a bit too easy. The scenery looked good, but detail could have been added. The map reminded him of old TMNF style tech, which was the idea of the map, which I was really happy about. The fake routes around the map looked good, but were maybe a bit overused. and also he would have liked to see a spicier finish, since it was a bit dull compared to the rest of the map, and that I could have added color correction and maybe some ambience. All of which I agreed with him on. Waypoint had a mini tech hunt competition consisting of 10 really solid mini tech tracks made by their members at the time. And having made many short tech tracks in the past, this inspired me to make another one. And it was now time to apply all the things that I've learned so far onto a new map. So I made the map Vinge, which translates to wing from Swedish. The map starts off with a right turn into a left precision turn, followed by more precision, through a narrow platform road turn, into a drift to the left, followed by more precision, into a drift to the right, more precision, and one last drift to the right, ending off with a black support road jump to the finish. This map is seemingly super simple, but in my opinion, it blew all of my other tracks I had previously made out of the water. The start is fun, the corners are unique, it's not too easy nor too hard, except for maybe the finish jump, and I think the scenery looks super good. I had finally managed to make a short tech map that I was really happy with, and I had finally found my mapping style. This was definitely a huge tipping point in my mapping career, as shortly after I made the map Elysian. I had decided that I had become decent at tech mapping and I now wanted to expand my horizons. I wanted to try something new, and being a fan of TMNF and TM2 Dirt, this made me try to make something of similar style in TM 2020. I didn't think about it much at the time of making this track. After all, this was going to be my first dirt track ever. The outcome could be absolutely horrendous, but at least I tried. Well, safe to say my expectations didn't really match the feedback. People seemingly liked it. A lot. Recognized by the creators of the game, the map became the track of the day, 17th of March, just a couple of days after the release of the map. I was stoked about all the comments about the map, which really motivated to keep me building. And I cannot say thank you enough for this, because I'm not only building for myself. The things that I make are also for other players to enjoy. Shortly after the release of this map, the Waypoint mapping team decided to introduce Waypoint Academy. Waypoint Academy is a small extension of the Waypoint mapping team, focusing on mappers that show great potential but don't quite have the skill to join the main team. The aim of the Academy team is to support upcoming mappers with the direct help from the main team, giving them access to the private members channel and the Waypoint projects. We will also try to help the members gain better publicity and become a more recognizable name in the community, so that even if they don't stay in the team, they will live better off than when they first joined. It will consist of 4 members, and the number might increase depending on interest, chosen through applications. Every 6 months, in sync with the other Trackmania season, we will do a full member rotation. This means that no one will stay in the Academy team for more than 6 months, unless their application gets approved multiple times. At each member rotation, we will consider one of the Academy members for the main team, but only if necessary improvements has been shown. Keep in mind that Waypoint Academy is not necessarily meant to be a gateway into the main Waypoint mapping team, but more of a place to develop new talents in the mapping community. Being a fan of the team and having gotten feedback from Sláys, which drastically changed how I map for the better, there was no question about applying, and more of a question if I had the potential to be accepted. Time goes on and no time wasted. During the time frame of the application, I made other maps, one of which was for Lentillion's Cornucopia campaign competition, an invite-only campaign containing maps from some of his viewers and friends, which would then be featured in a month-long hunting competition. I decided to make a short transitional dirt map by the name of Caffeine. It was just after the release of this map that I received this message from Sláys. I had been accepted, and was now a part of Waypoint Academy for 6 months, together with other talented mappers such as Enysado, Skifreak, OregoX and Roxiie. During the short time frame of me getting accepted into the Waypoint Academy, I have taken part in various different projects and challenges, and here are some of them. The first one that I would like to showcase is Corporeal, a duo map with another talented mapper named Gilli. This map took many iterations to make. We sent this map back and forth to each other over 30 times, ending up with a 6-minute long dirt transitional with some really amazing scenery. Another map that I made was nixx, which was a mapping challenge given by one of my viewers named Totox during a stream on Twitch. The challenge was to build a map in a 6x6 square, and I decided to take it to the next level, building a full-fledged tech map that is over 1 minute and 40 seconds long. This was a painful building process, but I am happy that I did it, and it looks amazing. And also thanks to Keissla, one of the Waypoint members and managers, for this amazing screenshot, and thanks to all the viewers for being in the chat during the building process. Another project that I participated in was the Slow Learner Cup map pack collaboration with Clearvision, another Waypoint member and manager, where I made 4 different maps: Smoldering, my first grass map, Pegation, a technical dirt map, Primordial, a competitive style tech track, and Jump, a mini RPG. Outside of the maps that I've shown you, I also have some projects of which are not yet released as of making this video. And who knows what the future will tell. With a new update introducing plastic, moving blocks and water, a new era of mapping in Trackmania begins. This is definitely the biggest passion project that I have ever done. If you would like to follow or support me, you can do so by following the links to my socials in the description. But there is one more thing. I would like to end the video by giving a huge thank you to all the amazing people that I've met throughout my first year in the Trackmania community. All of you who motivate me to keep doing what I love to do. I really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for watching.